We all know that the Royal Enfield Himalayan is a great motorcycle, but then there's no denying that it's a little too hardcore, a little too off-road focused, and ultimately it's an ADV which is meant for touring. Now, not everyone wants to go touring, not everyone has time to ride their motorcycles to Himalayas or explore new places. Well, what most of the riders are looking for is a motorcycle that has the off-road cred of the Himalayan, but it's also perfectly suited for city riding. Now, for this section of customers, Royal Enfield has come up with the Scram 411. Now, what this is, it's based on the Himalayan. It shares the frame and the engine with the Himalayan, but this is a motorcycle that's meant for urban riding. It is aimed at the youth. It is aimed at people who want to ride their motorcycles daily in daily riding conditions, and at the same time they also want a motorcycle that's capable off-road. So what the Scram 411 stands for is a motorcycle that's suited for both off-road riding as well as city riding. But that's on paper, and that's what Royal Enfield claims. Is it really the case though? Well, we have got some nice trails to ourselves, so let's find out what the Scram 411 is all about. The Scram 411 shares the same LS 410cc engine with the Himalayan, and it also has the same split cradle frame. Even the tank, which is of 15 liters, is exactly the same as the Himalayan. But then there are a lot of changes. From the top, it has new headlamp design. Of course, the headlamp unit is the same. There is no LED lamps. It's still running halogen lamps. But then there's no fairing now, as in the windscreen of the Himalayan is gone. And now you have this sturdy cast metal finish around the headlamp. So it looks quite cool. The other thing is, of course, it's the speedometer. Now this is again different, slightly different than the Himalayan. So this one has a speedometer that's taken directly from the Meteor. Follows the same design, and there is the tripper navigation as well. But on this motorcycle, it's optional, so it's not standard. Coming to the most important thing in terms of geometry, well, this bike now gets a suspension which has been lowered, and of course the wheel size is 19, not 21. Now, apart from that, this also gets a wider tire. This is 190/19 as compared to Himalaya's 19/90/21. So what it does is basically it aids handling. It makes it more agile. We'll come to that later on, but this is the primary reason for going a size smaller. The only problem I have with this wheel is that it still runs on spoke wheels. I thought it's meant for urban riding, so I was expecting to see alloy wheels, but Royal Enfield says that it's something that they're keeping for later on. So probably in the future you might get as an option, but right now you're only going to get spoke wheels. The other thing is the suspension. Of course, it has a lot of travel still, 190 meters of travel actually, but the Himalayan has 200 millimeters. So of course it has lost some travel. Apart from that, you get protection. You have this nice bash plate around here, and the ground clearance is also quite decent. Although it has dropped by 20 millimeters, this has a ground clearance of 200 millimeters. The other thing is, of course, the handlebar. It's more or less the same as the Himalayan, but then this has also been lowered because of smaller wheel, the suspension, and of course the new front fork. Now the handlebar is lowered by 60 millimeters. It's also been pulled back by 20 millimeters, but the foot pegs, it's exactly at the same position as it's in the Himalayan. So it gives you a very neutral sort of riding position, and in that regard I think it's quite comfortable. It's quite accessible as well, because the saddle height has also gone down by 5 millimeters. So if you're a shorter rider, the Himalayan was already very accessible, but this thing is going to be more accessible. On the chassis front, there aren't many changes, but then if you come to the saddle, you'll see that this has a single seat setup now. It doesn't get split seat. So this is again more to the Scrambler theme. The grab rails are also smaller. There is no luggage rack right now, although it is available as an accessory, but as standard you're going to get these smaller grab rails. Now the exhaust design is exactly the same, and overall the quality and fit and finish is more or less like the Himalayan. So it's not the best in the segment, but then it's quite adequate. Coming to the weight, this motorcycle weighs 5 kilograms less than the Himalayan, but all of that weight savings have come from, again, there's no fairing. It doesn't also get main stand, which weighs around 2 kilograms. So that's there. So 3 kilograms nearly you lose like that. Now the rear wheel and suspension is exactly identical to the Himalayan. So it has 180 millimeters of travel, and it is a monoshock. The tail is more or less unchanged. You get the same tail lamp, but the indicators, position and everything has been changed. So overall it looks like a Himalayan. Of course, that's been heavily modified, and it's been heavily modified because it has different duties now, as in it's not entirely off-road focused, it's also focused for city riding. Now it's time to ride the motorcycle, so let's get going and tell you how this engine and this whole package feels on the move. Like I said in the beginning, the LS410 motor is exactly identical to the Himalayan's unit. And in terms of power output and torque, this is also quite similar. It produces 24.3 bhp and 32 Newton meters of torque. Now the torque curve is quite flat. Royal Enfield says that 90% of the torque is available from 2500 rpm and it stays flat all the way up to 6500 rpm. That is something that we have experienced on the Himalayan as well, and this motor has a lot of grunt. So of course that means in terms of performance, what you get is something more of a familiar affair. So what that means is that this motor has more or less the same performance as you'd expect. The engine has a lot of grunt low down. At lower RPMs it really pulls, and even if you're riding it in the city, it has a lot of torque. It just keeps moving. Now first, second, third gear you can easily ride in the city, and once you get going, the torque curve, like I said, it's quite flat. The performance is adequate. In fact, it feels quite fast. And Royal Enfield hasn't changed the gearing of this motorcycle, including the final drive as well. So even in that regard, I think the performance is very similar to the Himalayans. The only difference is this feels slightly lighter motorcycle, and then it has got a smaller wheel. So this feels a little more playful than the Himalayan, as in it tips in quite easily. In terms of handling, I think this is of course a better motorcycle. This is suited for road riding. So this feels more agile, this feels more playful, and you can throw it around corners easily. It doesn't feel heavy like the Himalayan, even though the Himalayan is actually a very great handler. It's a very neutral handler for the motorcycle of its kind. But then this of course marks a definite improvement over the Himalayan in terms of handling. The other thing is the suspension is quite stiffly sprung. The Himalayan is very plush. So when you're doing off-road trails or when you're going over rocky roads, the Himalayan feels more composed. This has sort of a bumpy ride if you go over uneven road surfaces. This is a little firm, you can feel that. But when you're riding it off-road, it actually feels quite natural. Of course, that sort of underlying firmness is there, but when you're riding on fast trails, this feels more planted, this feels better, I'd say, and this feels more confidence inspiring. So for me, this thing actually, again, it has the best of both worlds, but then again, it has spoke wheels and the tires are the same C8 tires, but the size is different. The rear one is the same, and these are quite meaty tires. On gravelly roads, they have a lot of grip on offer. Coming to the brakes, now this doesn't get switchable ABS, so that's again the urban side of this motorcycle. Royal Enfield has skipped on that. So brakes are quite decent. They're not the best. Even on the road, they feel quite springy, and there's not a lot of feedback. Braking performance, I'd say it's adequate, but I would have liked more bite. I would have liked more feel from the lever. So that's about it in terms of ride and handling. Overall, a very familiar package, but of course this is light on its feet, as in not weight wise, but the way it changes direction. So if you are going to ride it in the city, I think this is a better motorcycle. At the same time, for off-roading, it's a great package. It has everything that is offered on the Himalayan. It's more or less there. It's 90% capable as a Himalayan. For an average rider who's not going to do hardcore off-roading, I think this thing will be perfectly suited. I think Royal Enfield has hit that sweet spot with the Scram 411 because it is a very sweet motorcycle. It has the best of both worlds. It is very good to ride in the city. I quite enjoyed it because Himalayan is a sort of motorcycle, even if you ride it on the road, it is quite fun. This feels livelier than the Himalayan. The engine has a lot of grunt, and at the same time, if you want to go off-road, well, yes, you have that off-road capability as well. The only minor issue I have with this motorcycle is, of course, I would have liked it to come with alloy wheels, at least optional, because I think 90% of the owners, they just do light off-roading. They ride on gravels. They're not going to do hardcore off-roading. In that regard, I think the target customer is urban youth. If the target customer is someone who's going to ride in the city, they could have gone with alloy wheels with long travel suspension. Of course, that would have worked perfectly fine. That's my personal opinion. But yeah, Royal Enfield has told us that that's something they are considering, and it might be offered soon. Now, coming to my final verdict, I think, yes, this is a great motorcycle. Like I said, it has that perfect balance between being an urban motorcycle and an off-road focused motorcycle. So it has the capability of the Himalayan, but then it won't feel out of place when you're riding it in the city. And in that regard, I think Royal Enfield, again, has done a great job. In terms of pricing, we are not sure how close it's going to be the Himalayan, but expect it to be around 5,000 to 10,000 less than the Himalayan. And I think even for that kind of money, this is a great motorcycle. The other thing is, of course, it has a lot of optional extras. So even if you want to go touring, even if you want to make it a hardcore touring sort of a motorcycle, you want to go off-road, there are a lot of accessories on offer, so you can virtually turn it into a Himalayan. So I think again Royal Enfield has done a very clever thing, and I think this is a motorcycle that will bring a lot of new customers to the Himalayan fold, because Himalayan, like I said in the beginning, that's a motorcycle that looks quite off-road focused. It has that bare bones look, and it looks quite elemental as well. It looks quite basic. But this feels more of a lifestyle product. So that means new buyers will definitely be inclined towards this motorcycle. Of course, in terms of off-road capability, it has that. So overall, it all depends on pricing, but I'm sure Royal Enfield will not disappoint us. And this is probably another winner for Royal Enfield in India.